The chain snapped. It was a small sound, a delicate, metallic click. But in that ballroom, in that silence, it hit like a gunshot. The pendant struck the white marble floor and skidded 3 feet. The broken chain hung from Senna's hand like something she had just extracted from a wound. She opened her fingers and let it fall, piece by piece, onto the floor between them. Deliberately, without apology. Gasps rippled through the room. Soft, controlled gasps, the kind that people in expensive clothing produce when something ugly breaks through the surface of an elegant evening. 1 woman near the bar. 2 men behind Senna. A server who froze mid-step with a tray of champagne flutes and did not move again. Thuso's hand rose to her neck. Her fingers pressed against the bare skin where the necklace had been. She could still feel the warmth of where the chain had rested for the past 3 hours. She could feel its absence now like something physical had been removed from her. The room was watching. All of it. Every conversation had died. Every flute had been lowered. The string quartet in the far corner was still playing, soft, expensive music. But no one could hear it anymore over the weight of the silence pressing down on everything. Senna took a step forward. She was wearing a deep burgundy gown, her dark hair pinned back with something that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her face was composed, controlled, the expression of a woman who had grown up in rooms like this one and understood exactly how much damage could be done inside them with the right words at the right volume. She did not need to raise her voice. "You shouldn't pretend to be what you're not," she said. The words were quiet, but the room was so still that they carried to every corner of it. Thuso did not move. She stood with her hand at her throat and her spine straight, and her chin level, and she looked at Senna, and she gave her nothing. Not tears, not panic, not explanation, not apology, nothing. But the room was still watching, and the room had understood what it had just witnessed. The pendant on the floor, the broken chain in Senna's hand, the quiet, surgical words that had followed. This was not an accident. This was not a social misunderstanding. This was exposure. Public. Deliberate. Final. Senna took another step closer. "You don't belong here," she said. And she reached for Thuso again. A hand caught her wrist. Not Thuso's hand. Someone else's. The grip was firm. Completely firm. The kind that communicated a clear and final message without needing to squeeze any harder than necessary. Senna stopped instantly. Not because of the pain, but because of who the hand belonged to. The man who had stepped forward was tall. He stood with the particular stillness of someone who had never needed to prove anything to a room, because every room he entered had already understood him before he opened his mouth. He was in his early 30s, dressed in a dark suit that fit him with the precision of something made specifically for his body. No tie. The top button of his shirt open, just enough to reveal the edge of a tattoo that disappeared down his neck and beneath his collar. His face was clean-shaven, his jaw set, and there was a small scar on his lower lip. So faint you would miss it if you were not close enough, but once you noticed it, it was the only thing you kept looking at. His eyes were calm. Completely, unnervingly calm. Minho. The change in the room was immediate and total. Not loud. Not dramatic. No one made a sound. But the quality of the silence shifted. From the stunned silence of people watching a scandal unfold, into something else entirely. Into the specific silence of people who understood that the most important person in the room had just entered an equation, and that the equation was now settled. He held Senna's wrist without looking at her. He was looking at Thuso, not with pity, not with suspicion, not with the evaluating, searching look of a man trying to decide whether she was worth the trouble he was about to cause on her behalf. He looked at her the way someone looks at a situation they have already fully assessed and already completely decided how to handle. Then, and only then, did he look at Senna. "That's enough," he said. 2 words. Quiet. Absolute. The kind of words that did not need to be repeated because the person they were directed at already understood that the conversation was over. Senna's face moved through 3 emotions in less than 2 seconds. First, shock. Pure and unguarded, because whatever she had planned for this evening, whatever scenario she had run through in her mind when she spotted Thuso across the ballroom and decided to walk toward her, it had not included this. Second, anger. The kind that burns hotter because it has been embarrassed in front of people who will remember. Third, something more complicated. Something with history behind it. Something that moved across her face and then disappeared just as quickly, buried beneath the rigid composure she had been trained since childhood to maintain in public no matter what was happening underneath. He released her wrists slowly, one finger at a time, deliberately. Then he turned back to Thuso. He bent down and picked up the broken necklace from the floor. The pendant and the snapped chain, both of them, resting in his open palm. He held it for a moment. Then he looked at her. Not at the necklace. At her. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was the same. Quiet. Controlled. But the question was direct, and he was asking only her, in a room full of people who were all still watching, as if none of them existed. Thuso looked at him for the first time. She had known his name before tonight. She had spent 4 months researching every significant person in Korea's elite investment circle before she walked through that ballroom door. She had known Minho would be here. She had known he was important, not in any way that showed up in company filings or official biographies, but in the way that mattered most in rooms like this one. His power was quiet, structural, the kind that lives in who moves when you walk in and who doesn't, and what that difference means. She had planned to stay far away from him tonight. She had not planned for this. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady. She had not planned that either. She had simply refused to be anything else. Something moved across his face. Brief, almost imperceptible. Then he turned to the room. He did not raise his voice. He did not make an announcement. He simply looked out at the watching faces with the calm expression of a man who found it mildly unfortunate that any of this had required an audience at all. "If she doesn't belong here," he said, "then neither do I." No one spoke. No one moved. And then, in the particular way of powerful rooms, the silence broke naturally. Not because the tension had released, but because the decision had been made, and there was nothing left to watch. Conversations resumed. Guests turned back to their champagne. 2 of the investors Thuso had been speaking with before Senna arrived drifted slowly back toward her, cautiously, as if they were recalibrating everything they thought they knew about who she was. Senna stood where she was for 3 full seconds, long enough to be noticed, long enough for everyone still watching to understand that she was choosing to leave, rather than being dismissed. Then she turned and walked toward the far end of the ballroom, her back straight, her chin level, leaving the broken chain lying on the floor where it had fallen. She did not pick it up. Minho looked at Thuso one more time. He held out the pendant, just the pendant, the chain too broken to be worn. She took it from his palm. Their fingers did not touch. He made sure of that. The distance between them was precise and intentional. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," he said. And then he walked away. Thuso closed her fingers around the cold gold pendant and stood in the middle of the cleared space, surrounded by the returning hum of resumed conversation, and understood 2 things at the same time. The first was that the humiliation had failed. Senna had intended to expose her and remove her, and instead the most powerful man in the room had made himself a wall between her and the damage. Whatever questions people now had about who Thuso was, and they had questions, she could see it in the careful, measuring glances that kept crossing the room toward her. Those questions were now tangled up with a more interesting one. Why had Minho intervened? The second thing she understood was more dangerous than the first. He had not looked surprised when he stepped forward. He had not looked uncertain. He had looked like a man acting on a decision he had already made. Long before tonight. Long before that ballroom. Long before Senna's hand had reached for her chain. Which meant he already knew something. And Thuso, standing in the middle of that perfect golden room with a broken necklace in her closed fist, and 4 months of careful, calculated construction suddenly feeling very fragile underneath her, understood that the real problem had not just been avoided. It had just begun. Oh my! What could have prompted that? If you're curious to know what really happened next, stay right here. Don't go anywhere. Keep listening. And if you're enjoying the story so far, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let me tell you what happened next. She did not leave the ballroom. That was the first decision she made after Minho walked away from her. Every instinct she had, the same instincts that had kept her alive and moving through situations far more physically dangerous than a Korean ballroom. Those instincts were telling her to collect her bag from the coat check, exit through the side door, get into a cab, and spend the night in her apartment restructuring her entire strategy from scratch. But leaving would mean Senna had won. And Thuso had not come this far to hand anything to anyone. So she turned back to the 2 investors who had drifted close again, and she picked up the conversation exactly where it had been interrupted. Her voice did not shake. Her hands did not move to her bare neck. She spoke about infrastructure and capital flows, and the specific inefficiencies in cross-continental investment corridors that represented real, untapped opportunity for the right kind of forward-looking capital. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. Not because she had been trained in it, but because she genuinely believed it. The strategy she had built, the vision she had for what she could construct if she could only get access to the right funding and the right networks. None of that was fabricated. The only fabricated part was the platform she had created to get into the room where she could present it. The investors listened. She could see the recalibration happening in real time. They had written her off when Senna made her move, and now they were writing themselves back in, because Minho had made it complicated, and these were men who paid attention to complicated. She spoke for 20 minutes. She took 2 business cards. She gave nothing away about what had happened, and let them reach their own conclusions about why it had. By the time she reached her apartment at midnight, she had 3 follow-up emails drafted in her head and a fractured pendant in her coat pocket, and the knowledge that she had survived the night. But she also had something else. She had the image of Minho standing in that ballroom with her broken necklace in his palm, looking at her with eyes that were too calm and too informed for a man who was supposed to know nothing about her. She sat on her bed in the dark for a long time, not sleeping, thinking about what he knew. And when he had learned it, the next morning, Thuso's phone rang at 7:45. It was a number she did not recognize. Korean prefix. She almost did not answer. She was in the middle of her second coffee and her first hour of the kind of focused strategic thinking that she protected like it was currency, which for her it was. She answered, "Miss Thuso." The voice on the other end was a woman's. Professional. The kind of voice that had been trained to sound helpful, while conveying that the person it was representing did not have time to waste. "I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Lee. He would like to meet with you this morning, if you're available." Thuso set her coffee down. "Mr. Lee," she said. "Yes. Which Mr. Lee?" A pause that was exactly 1 second too short to be a real pause. More like a brief, polite acknowledgement that the question was not serious. "Minho," the woman said. Thuso looked at the wall across from her bed for a moment. The paint was a shade of white that she had always found slightly too bright for early morning. She had been meaning to buy a print to hang there. She had not gotten around to it. "What time?" she asked. 10 o'clock. "I'll send the address." The call ended. Thuso put the phone down on the mattress beside her and picked up her coffee again. She took a long sip, set it down, picked it up again. Then she opened her laptop and spent the next hour doing what she should have done more thoroughly 4 months ago, researching everything she could find about Minho that was not in the financial press. The financial press knew what he wanted it to know. She needed what it didn't. What she found confirmed what she had already understood from the ballroom. His name appeared in the backgrounds of things. In the second-hand reporting of deals that had collapsed when he withdrew support, in the careful non-mentions of his involvement in situations that had resolved in ways no one could fully explain, in the way journalists who covered Korean finance wrote around him rather than about him, the way you write around something you can see clearly but are not willing to touch directly. He was not simply wealthy. He was structural. He was the kind of presence that other powerful people oriented themselves around without always knowing why. The way buildings are designed around load-bearing walls, that are never the most visible feature of the architecture, but are the reason the whole thing is still standing. And he had chosen, in front of an entire ballroom of Seoul's most connected people, to make himself a wall between her and the woman trying to tear her down. She did not understand why. She needed to understand why before she walked into that meeting. By 9:30, she had dressed carefully. Not the performance of last night, but a controlled, precise version of herself. Dark trousers. A blazer in a deep rust color that she had bought in Johannesburg 3 years ago, and that still made her feel capable when she wore it. Small gold earrings. Nothing at her throat. She took the address from the text that had arrived at 8 and put it into the map on her phone. The building it directed her to was in Gangnam. Not a hotel lobby, not a restaurant. A private building with a glass facade and a lobby that contained 2 security personnel and a reception desk and nothing else. No company signage. No branding. Just a very clean, very quiet space that communicated, in the way expensive things often communicate their value, through what was absent rather than what was present. The woman at reception looked up when she walked in. "Miss Thuso?" "Yes. 15th floor. Someone will meet you at the elevator." Someone did. A man in a dark suit who said nothing, simply gestured toward a set of glass doors and walked ahead of her. She followed. The 15th floor was a single open space. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. The city of Seoul spread out below them in every direction. Dense and enormous, and moving at the pace of a place that had never learned to slow down. There was a long table in the center of the room, 8 chairs around it, all of them empty. At the far end of the room, standing at the window with his back to her, was Minho. He was dressed simply. Dark shirt, dark trousers, no jacket. She could see more of the tattoos in daylight. They covered most of his left forearm, a dense, intricate design that moved from his wrist upward and disappeared beneath his sleeve. He heard her come in, but did not turn immediately. He gave her the 2 seconds to take in the room, and then he turned. In the ballroom, in the low golden light, he had been striking in a way that she had not allowed herself to process fully, because she had been managing a crisis. In the clear daylight of this room, with Seoul behind him and nothing to distract from his presence, she allowed herself to process it now, quickly, professionally, and then set it aside. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for the invitation," she said. He gestured toward the table. She sat. He sat across from her, not at the head of the table but directly across, a choice she noticed. He put his hands flat on the table. "No phone, no papers, no props." "I know who you are," he said. She looked at him steadily. She did not respond. "Not the version you presented last night," he continued. "The actual version. I know where you're from. I know what your company's actual revenue is. I know how you got on the guest list. I've known since approximately 2 weeks after your name first appeared in the context of anyone connected to this investment circle." The city moved behind him. A plane tracked silently across the window. Thuso kept her hands in her lap, relaxed, and kept her face still. "Okay," she said. He blinked. Slightly. Almost nothing. But she caught it. "That's all," he said. "What would you like me to say?" she asked. He studied her for a moment. Then something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly, but the very beginning of something that could become one. "Most people," he said carefully, "when they realize I've just confirmed I could have had them removed from the country at any point in the last 2 months, say more than okay. Most people probably feel more surprised than I do right now," she said. "You clearly didn't have me removed. You clearly didn't expose me last night when you had the perfect opportunity to let Senna do exactly that without getting involved. So the question is not what you know. The question is what you want." He was quiet for a long moment. She held the quiet with him. She had learned early that silence was a negotiating tool, and that the person who felt compelled to fill it first was usually the one with less leverage. She had learned that lesson before she was 20. It had served her every day since. "I want to know why," he said finally. "Why what? Why the charade? You're intelligent. Genuinely intelligent. I've read everything you actually wrote. The real strategy documents, not the inflated pitch materials. The vision you have is real. It doesn't need the fabrication." Something moved through Thuso. She kept it off her face, but she felt it. The specific sensation of being seen by someone in a way you had not anticipated and were not fully prepared for. A real strategy from a real person with a real company registered in South Africa with actual revenue that reflects actual current status does not get me into that room, she said. Not in 2 years. Not in 5. Maybe in 10, if everything goes perfectly. I don't have 10 years. Why not? She looked at him. She decided, in the span of a single second, how much truth to give him. Because the window I'm trying to build toward will close, she said. The specific constellation of infrastructure needs, emerging market capital availability, and investor appetite that makes my model viable. It exists right now. Not in 10 years. The real version of my company could do what I'm describing if it had access to the right capital and the right networks. Getting into that room was never about pretending to be wealthy. It was about being taken seriously long enough to show what the actual work can do. He looked at her for a long time. Outside, Seoul continued at its relentless pace. That's a dangerous game you're playing, he said. I know, she said. The people in that room last night, several of them are not forgiving about this kind of thing. I know that too. If the wrong person had gotten hold of the information Senna was trying to leverage last night, you would not simply have been asked to leave the event. There are people in that circle who protect their exclusivity with methods that are not polite. Thuso looked at him. Are you one of those people? He held her gaze. I haven't decided yet. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her since she arrived in Korea. She almost smiled. She did not, but she almost did. Then I suppose I'm still in a precarious position, she said. Yes, he said. You are. He was quiet for a moment. But you're still here, which means you're not entirely without options. She waited. He unfolded his hands and placed them back in his lap. I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. All right. Is the vision real? Not the company's current size. Not the numbers you inflated for the guest list. The actual vision. The infrastructure corridor. The model you described to Baekjun Seo and Oh Hyun-woo last night. Is it real? Or is it a sophisticated-sounding frame you built to say the right things to the right people? She leaned forward slightly. Just enough. Let me ask you something back, she said. He waited. If I had walked into that room last night as exactly who I am, Thuso, 28 years old, from Soweto, legitimate company with modest revenue and a real but unproven model, would anyone have listened? He did not answer immediately. He considered it honestly, which she respected. No, he said. Then you already know the answer to your question, she said. The vision is real. The only fabricated part is the stage I needed to stand on to make anyone look at it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm going to need to see everything. The real documents. The actual model. All of it. She looked at him. Why? Because if it's as strong as you seem to believe it is, he said, then we may have something to discuss. She sat with that for a moment. She was aware of the geometry of this situation, of what it could mean if he was genuine, of what it could mean if he was not. She was aware that she was sitting across from a man who held enough power to either build the exact thing she had come to Korea to build, or to end the attempt entirely. She was also aware, in a part of herself that she kept carefully separate from the strategic part, that he was looking at her with the kind of attention that very few people had ever given her. Not the attention of someone assessing a threat or a tool. Something more careful than that. Something that she did not have a clean category for, and therefore set aside. All right, she said. I'll send you everything. He nodded. He stood. The meeting was over. Not abruptly, but naturally, the way things end when the necessary thing has been said. He walked her to the elevator himself. She had not expected that. At the elevator door, he stopped. She pressed the button. They stood side by side for a moment, both facing the closed silver doors. Last night, he said. She looked at him. The way you stood there, he said. After the chain broke. The way you didn't move. He paused. That was not nothing. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. No, she said. It wasn't. The doors closed. She rode down 15 floors in the clean, humming silence of the elevator, and she did not let herself process what had just happened until she was through the lobby and out on the street with Seoul's morning noise wrapping around her. Then she let out a slow breath, and she started thinking. She sent him everything that night. Not a curated version. Not a cleaned-up, slightly better than real version. She sent him the actual documents, the genuine company registration, the real revenue figures, the full strategy deck with honest projections, the research she had done independently over 18 months that had led her to the specific investment thesis she was building around. She included a cover note. It said, "You asked for the real version. This is it. It's smaller than what I claimed. The thinking behind it is not." She hit send at 11:42 p.m., and then sat with the discomfort of having handed a stranger in a foreign country a complete and accurate picture of how exposed she actually was. She did not sleep well. At 6:15 the following morning, her phone showed a notification. One email arrived at 2 a.m. from Minho. It contained 4 words, "The thinking is not." She sat in her dark apartment staring at those 4 words for a long time. Outside, Seoul was beginning to wake up. A delivery motorbike went past on the street below. Somewhere in the building above her, someone's alarm was going off. She did not respond to the email. She did not need to. They both understood what had been said. The call from Senna came 3 days later. Thuso was in a cafe in Itaewon, working through her second draft of a revised pitch document, when the phone rang with a number she did not recognize. Not the same number as Lee Minho's assistant. A different one. She answered it because she always answered unknown numbers. Unknown numbers were how things happened. I know you think last night worked in your favor, the voice said. No greeting. No introduction. She did not need one. The voice was the same as in the ballroom. Musical, controlled, with ice running through the center of it. But I want you to understand something. Thuso closed her laptop slowly. What do you want to understand? She said. What he does when he finds something interesting, Senna said. He circles it. He studies it. He decides what it's worth. And then when the novelty is gone, he moves on. That's what you are to him right now. A novelty. Thank you for the context, Thuso said. A pause. Longer this time. The kind that meant she had said the wrong thing from Senna's perspective, which meant she had said the right thing from her own. You don't belong in his world, Senna said. Her voice had dropped slightly. Become more precise. More personal. Not because of where you're from. Because of what he is. You don't understand what you're walking into. What am I walking into? Thuso asked. Another pause. I'll be watching, Senna said. Everything you do. Every meeting you take. Every connection you try to build. I was in this world before you arrived, and I will be in it after you're gone. The only question is how much damage happens in between. The line went dead. Thuso put the phone on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then she reopened her laptop. Then she closed it again. She picked up her coffee, found it had gone cold, set it back down. She thought about Senna's voice. About what was underneath the threat. She was not someone who felt contempt for people whose pain made them dangerous. She had lived in enough places and seen enough situations to understand that pain was almost always the thing underneath aggression. Senna had lost something. Not just Lee Minho, but something that Lee Minho's choice in that ballroom had made real and final in a way it perhaps had not been before. That did not make her less dangerous. It made her more dangerous. Thuso ordered a fresh coffee and went back to work. But she kept Senna in a corner of her thinking. The way you keep track of weather. 2 weeks passed. In those 2 weeks, 3 things happened that mattered. The first, Lee Minho's office requested a formal business meeting. Not a casual follow-up. A proper sit-down, with specific parameters requested in advance. Market sizing data, case studies from comparable investment structures in sub-Saharan markets, a timeline projection. The kind of request that came from someone who had read what she sent and was asking questions that meant they were taking it seriously. She prepared for it for 4 days. She did not inflate a single number. She built the most honest, rigorous version of her pitch that she had ever constructed. More rigorous, frankly, than any version she had built before, because she was building it for someone who already knew what the inflated version looked like and had explicitly chosen to engage with the real one instead. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. He brought 2 other people, a man he introduced only as a financial analyst and a woman he introduced as a structural consultant. They asked detailed, intelligent questions. He said relatively little. He listened with the complete attention of someone for whom listening was a skill he had developed intentionally. At the end, he said, "We'll need another meeting," she said. "I'll be available." They did not shake hands when she left. He walked her to the elevator again. The doors opened. She stepped in. This time, just before the doors closed, their eyes met, and she held the eye contact for exactly 1 second before the doors shut between them. She did not analyze that moment until she was home. Then she analyzed it probably more than she should have. The second thing that happened, she was followed. She noticed it on a Thursday morning. A man in a gray jacket who appeared in 2 separate places she went that day, far enough apart that coincidence was not a reasonable explanation. She did not react. She did not change her route. She filed the information carefully and thought about who might have arranged it and what they were hoping to learn. She thought about Senna. She thought about others in that ballroom whose interests she might have complicated without fully understanding whose territory she had walked into. She thought about Lee Minho, but only briefly, not because she was certain he was not responsible, but because nothing about the way he had engaged with her over the past 2 weeks felt like the behavior of a man who was surveilling her. She called a contact she had in Seoul, a South African journalist who had been based there for 6 years and knew the city the way only people who had had to learn it the hard way knew it. His name was Dumi, and when she explained the situation over the phone in a rapid blend of Zulu and English that she only used when she needed to speak without being understood by anyone around her, He was quiet for a long moment. "Which ballroom?" he asked. She told him. Another long pause. "Thuso," he said slowly. "I know," she said. "The man who stepped in for you. I know, Dummy. You understand what he runs. Not just the business side. Yes. You understand that him being connected to your situation means you are now connected to everything he is connected to. I understand that." Dummy breathed out slowly. "The woman who tore your necklace. Senna. You know who her family is." She had done research. She had not found everything. "Tell me," he told her. She sat with the phone pressed to her ear and listened to Dummy explain the specific intersection of old Korean family money and the particular kind of arrangement that old Korean family money sometimes had with the kind of structure that Minho represented. And she understood, in full for the first time, the exact geometry of the situation she was standing in the middle of. Senna's family and Minho's operation had been intertwined for years. Not romantically, or not only romantically, structurally, financially, in ways that were never written down but were understood by everyone who mattered. The relationship between Senna and Minho had not simply been two people. It had been an alliance. And when it ended, however it had ended, the alliance had become complicated. And Thuso, who had walked into that ballroom with a fabricated identity and a real vision and the audacity of someone who had nothing left to lose, had become the thing that made the complexity visible. "What do I do?" she said. "What you always do," Dummy said. "You think. And then you move." She hung up. She sat in her apartment with the city running its noise outside her window, and she thought. The third thing that happened in those 2 weeks was smaller, more personal, and in some ways more significant than either of the other two. Minho called her directly for the first time. Not through his assistant. Not through a formal request from his office. He called from his own phone, in the evening, at a time when there was no business reason for the call. She answered. "Are you free tomorrow evening?" he asked. She held the phone and looked at the wall across from her bed. The wall that still had no print on it. "Depends," she said. "What for?" "Dinner," he said. "Not a meeting. Dinner." She was quiet for a moment. "Is this relevant to the business we're discussing?" she asked. "No," he said. She was quiet for another moment. "I'll check my schedule," she said, "and send you a message." "All right," he said. He did not say anything else. He did not try to persuade her or explain why he was asking or tell her she would enjoy it. He simply said, "All right," and let the space be empty and left the decision entirely with her, which was, she realized after she hung up, precisely the right thing to do. She put the phone down. She looked at the wall. She thought about the ballroom, about his hand catching Senna's wrist, about the broken pendant in his open palm, about the elevator doors closing on a second of sustained eye contact. She thought about Dummy's voice on the phone, about the complexity she was standing in the middle of, about the very clear and well-reasoned argument she could make for keeping this strictly professional, for maintaining clean distance, for not adding any personal dimension to a situation that already had more moving parts than she could fully track. Then she thought about the 4 words in the email at 2 a.m. The thinking is not. She picked up the phone. She sent him a message. "I'm free." The restaurant was not what she expected. She had expected somewhere designed to impress. The kind of place chosen to communicate status through the difficulty of the reservation and the architecture of the menu. She had expected the performance of it, the way powerful men often chose environments that did the work of announcing themselves so they did not have to. Instead, he took her to a small restaurant in a narrow street in a part of the city that was not Gangnam. It had maybe 15 tables. The lighting was warm and low. The owner appeared to know him, not in the way of a man who had made a reservation, but in the way of a person who came regularly and was genuinely welcomed. They were given a table in the back corner. No one in the restaurant appeared to recognize him as anything other than a regular customer. She sat across from him and looked at the menu, which was handwritten in Korean, and looked up at him. "Can you?" she started. "Yes," he said. "What do you like? Tell me what's good." He ordered for both of them in Korean, and then folded the menu closed and set it aside and looked at her with the same attentiveness he had shown in every previous interaction, except that this time there were no documents between them and no business parameters around the conversation, and it was different. She was aware of the difference. "Why this place?" she asked. "Because it's honest," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means the food is the point, not the reputation of the restaurant. Not the price. The food. She looked around at the simple space. You come here often? When I want to think, he said. And tonight? He looked at her. Tonight is not for thinking. She held his gaze for a moment. You should know, she said, that I know more about your situation than I did 3 weeks ago. He did not look surprised. I expected that. Does it change the conversation? He considered. It depends on what you know. I know about the arrangement between your organization and Senna's family. I know that the relationship between the two of you was not only personal. I know that its end left certain structural questions that have not been fully resolved. And I know, she paused, that my presence in that ballroom, and specifically your intervention, made all of those questions visible in a way they might not have been otherwise. He was quiet. The owner brought a small dish, something that arrived hot and smelling of something she did not recognize, but that made her immediately hungry. Does that change how you see this? He asked. I don't know yet, she said. Does it change how you see me? He looked at her steadily. No. Why not? Because you were already in the room before I knew any of it mattered, he said. I made a decision in that ballroom because of who you are. What I knew about you and what was happening to you and why. Not because of the other considerations. She looked at him. You knew my story was fabricated and you still. I chose you anyway, he said simply. Yes. She sat with that. The food arrived. They ate. She found herself relaxing in increments. The way you relax when you are in a space that is not performing at you. When the environment is not asking you to be a version of yourself designed for consumption. She talked about South Africa. Not the polished version. Not the version she used in pitch meetings. She talked about Soweto specifically, about the particular intelligence of people who learn to navigate limited resources, about the way growing up in a place that the world underestimates teaches you to see the things the world misses. He listened. He asked questions. Not the questions of someone being polite. Actual questions, the kind that showed he had been paying attention to what she said 3 sentences ago. At one point she asked him about the tattoos. She had been looking at them periodically through the meal, the visible portion of his forearm where the ink was dense and intricate and clearly meaningful. He turned his arm slightly so she could see more of it. This one, he said, indicating a particular design near his wrist, I had done when I was 22. It was the year I understood what I was actually going to be. What did you understand? He looked at her. There was something careful in his face. The face of someone who had learned to give information selectively, not from dishonesty, but from long experience with the cost of carelessness. That the world I was born into had a specific gravity, he said. That it pulled everything in a certain direction, and that I could either resist it and break, or move with it in a direction I chose. And did you choose? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Mostly. She nodded. She did not push. There was more food. There was tea. At one point he made her laugh. Not with a joke exactly, but with a dry observation about a situation she had described, delivered in a tone so understated that the humor of it arrived a full second after he finished the sentence. She realized she had not laughed in weeks. Not properly. The laughter surprised her, came out fuller than she intended, and she saw something happen in his face that she did not have a category for, but that she set carefully aside to think about later. They walked out into the narrow street at 10:30. Seoul at night was a different city from Seoul during the day. Denser somehow, the neon and the noise creating a texture that the daylight hours didn't have. He walked beside her. Not close. A respectful distance. She was aware of the space between them and of the care with which it was maintained. At the corner where her cab would come, they stopped. I don't usually do this, she said. Which part? He asked. She thought about it. Any of it. He nodded slowly. Neither do I. She looked at him. In the mixed light of the street, the scar on his lip was faintly visible. The tattoos disappeared into his collar. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at her with an attention that she had decided, over the course of the evening, to stop managing and simply receive. The business, she said. Whatever happens with the business. That's separate from tonight. I know, he said. I need you to understand that they're separate things, because I cannot afford for them to become the same thing. I understand, he said. I'm not asking for them to be the same thing. She looked at him. What are you asking for? He was quiet for a moment. Then, another evening like this one, when you're ready for it. No pressure. No urgency. She thought about Dumi's voice on the phone. about the complexity, about the clear and well-reasoned argument she could make for distance. She thought about his 4 words at 2 a.m. "I'll let you know," she said. Her cab arrived. She got in. She did not look back as it pulled away, because she was not someone who looked back. But she was smiling slightly as she faced forward, and she was aware of it, and she did not make herself stop. The betrayal came from someone she had not been watching closely enough. His name was Park Ji-hyun, and he was one of the 2 people Minho had brought to the second business meeting. The man introduced as a financial analyst. He was precise, well-dressed, and had asked the most technically sophisticated questions during the meeting. She had found him impressive and had filed him under useful potential ally. She had not filed him under threat. She should have. She found out about it from Minho himself, on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after their dinner in the small restaurant, when he called her at 8 a.m. and asked her to come to the building in Gangnam as soon as possible. His voice on the phone was contained, not angry in a loud way. Contained, which she had learned by now was actually more serious. She arrived at the 15th floor to find him standing at the window again, which was, she was beginning to understand, his default position when something was working through his mind. There were 2 other men in the room she had not seen before. They stood near the far wall with the particular stillness of people who were present in a functional capacity and not a social one. He turned when she came in. "Park Ji-hyun gave a full account of your situation to 3 people in the investment circle," he said. "Your actual identity, the real company figures, the fabricated guest list entry, everything. Last night." She stood with her hands at her sides. "Who were the 3 people?" she asked. He told her 2 of the names. She recognized them. Both were in the inner circle of the investment group she had been building toward. Both were men who had the capacity to shut doors permanently. "The 3rd?" she asked. His jaw tightened slightly. "Senna's family." She breathed out slowly. There it was. "How do you know Ji-hyun was the source?" she asked. "Because he told me directly," Minho said. "This morning. He came to me first. He said," a pause carefully controlled, "that he felt I was not thinking clearly about the situation, that I was making decisions based on something personal that was creating risk for the organization." Thuso looked at him. Was he wrong? Minho met her eyes. No. She sat down in one of the chairs at the long table. She pressed her fingers together and looked at the city through the window and thought. "What do the 2 investors know now?" she asked. "Specifically, that your company's stated capital position was fabricated, that your guest list entry was fraudulent, that your legitimate business is significantly smaller than represented. Do they know the strategy?" "They know the strategy," he said. "Ji-hyun had all the documents." She thought. "And Senna's family? They have what Ji-hyun had, which is everything." He paused. "Senna's family has relationships with several regulatory bodies. If they choose to use this, they can create significant legal complications for your ability to operate in Korea." She was quiet. He crossed the room and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The 2 men near the wall remained where they were. He leaned forward slightly. "I need to know what you want to do," he said. She looked at him. "What are my options?" "You can go home," he said. It was not a recommendation. It was one option among others, offered honestly. Leave before the regulatory pressure materializes. Take the real business and rebuild the approach. You have the strategy. You have the thinking. It doesn't disappear because this particular attempt became complicated. What else? "You stay," he said. "And we address this directly. Not by running from it, by getting ahead of it. There are investors in that circle who care more about the model than about how you got in the room. If we move in the right order, we can create enough legitimate traction that the attempt to use your background against you becomes complicated to pursue." She looked at him steadily. "When you say we, I mean I will be involved," he said. "Openly. That creates its own complications." "Yes. For you. Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" He held her gaze. "You know why?" She did know. She had been knowing for several weeks, and she had been carrying it carefully, separately, not allowing it to contaminate the professional architecture of what they were building. She was very good at keeping things in separate spaces. She had learned that skill for reasons of survival. But sitting in this room, in this daylight, with his 2-word answer hanging in the air between them, she let the 2 spaces touch for just a moment. "If you do this openly," she said, "what happens to the situation with Senna's family?" The structural complications you mentioned. I handle those, he said. How? That's not something you need to carry. She looked at him. I need to understand the ground I'm standing on. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the arrangement with Senna's family was a structure that should have been dissolved 2 years ago. It was maintained past its usefulness for reasons that were not good reasons. What I'm going to do is dissolve it. He paused. The timing is not ideal, but the decision is not new. She sat with that. Ji-hyun, she said. What happens to him? Something moved across Lee Minho's face. He made a choice, he said. He'll live with it. She did not ask for more detail on that. She looked at the city for a moment. She thought about what she had come to Korea to do. She thought about the 18 months of work behind the strategy, sitting in those documents that Ji-hyun had handed to people who could use them against her. She thought about the window of viability she had described to Lee Minho in their first meeting. The specific, time-sensitive opportunity she had built all of this around. She thought about going home. She thought about what going home looked like. Her cousin's couch. Rebuilt again. A different approach again. In 5 years, maybe. In 10. She thought about the small restaurant. About him ordering for her and asking real questions and making her laugh at 10:30 p.m. on a Korean street. She thought about the broken necklace pendant still sitting in a small dish on her bedside table. All right, she said. He looked at her. We stay, she said. And we address it directly. Something settled in his face. Not relief exactly. Something more like recognition. The expression of someone for whom a result they had believed was likely had now been confirmed. Okay, he said. He stood. She stood. One of the men near the wall moved toward the door. The meeting had shifted from conversation to action, and the room had adjusted around that shift without anyone announcing it. At the door, she stopped. Minho, she said. He turned. It was the first time she had said his name without the formal prefix. She saw him register it. Thank you, she said. For the first night. For all of it. He held her gaze. Don't thank me yet, he said. We haven't won anything. No, she said. But you chose. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said quietly. I did. The next 6 weeks were the most complicated of Thuso's life, and her life had not been short on complicated. Lee Minho moved the way she imagined tectonic plates moved, slowly, irresistibly, without drama, rearranging the landscape simply by being in motion. He did not make public announcements. He did not release statements. He had a series of conversations with specific people in specific orders, and the result of those conversations was a gradual, quiet redistribution of the understanding within Seoul's investment circle about who Thuso was and what she was building. Not the fabricated version. The real one. He made it clear, in the particular way of someone whose clarity did not require volume, that her methodology in gaining access to the circle was something he was not interested in litigating, and that any attempt to use her background as a mechanism for exclusion would be understood as a commentary on the person making the attempt rather than on Thuso. He did not say this in ways that could be quoted. He said it in the ways that counted. 2 of the 3 investors who had received Ji-hyun's disclosure asked for meetings with Thuso directly. She attended both meetings with no fabrication, no inflated numbers. The honest strategy, the honest company, the honest vision, and the track record of her thinking, which was, as Lee Minho had said from the beginning, not nothing. Both meetings went long. One of the investors, a man named Choi Byung-kyu, who was 63 years old and had been watching emerging market investment structures for 30 years, looked at her at the end of their meeting and said, "The entry was unacceptable. The thinking is exceptional. We'll need to talk about terms." She walked out of that building into the afternoon Seoul sunshine and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her face tilted up toward the light and let herself feel it. Not victory, because there was no victory yet, but the specific sensation of legitimate traction, of the real work being seen on its own terms. She called Lee Minho. Choi Byung-kyu wants to talk about terms, she said. A pause on the line. Good, he said. Good, she said. A silence that was not uncomfortable. Are you free tonight? He asked. The small restaurant. If you'd like. Yes, she said. I'd like. Senna did not disappear. Thuso had not expected her to. People like Senna, people whose pain was organized around a central loss that they had not processed and were not willing to process, did not simply withdraw when their first attempt failed. They restructured. She appeared at an event Thuso attended 6 weeks in. Not a confrontation. She did not approach Thuso directly. She was simply present, across a room, watching with the composed, patient expression of someone who had moved from immediate action to longer strategy. Thuso noticed her. Senna noticed that Thuso noticed her. Neither of them gave the other more than that. But the following week, something happened. A document appeared in the possession of a journalist, a financial reporter who covered the Korean investment sector. The document was a detailed account of the exact structure of Lee Minho's organization. Not the legitimate business side. The other side. The parts that did not appear in filings. The document had come from somewhere inside his operation. Someone with access and a motive and enough anger to use both. Lee Minho found out about it on a Tuesday. Thuso found out 40 minutes later in his office, when he looked at her across the long table with a face that was fully controlled and said, "Someone inside gave a journalist everything." She looked at him. "The document is accurate?" "Substantially." "What are the consequences if it publishes?" He was quiet for a moment. "Significant." She leaned forward. "Who had access?" He named 3 people. Then he looked at her carefully. "Ji-hyun is one of them." She thought. "But Ji-hyun already came to you. He already made his choice. Why would he?" "Not Ji-hyun," he said. "Not this time." She sat back. The 2 other names he had given her. She thought about them. She did not know either well. "Is one of them connected to Senna?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. Then, "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then we know where this started." He was quiet. She looked at him. He was sitting with the stillness she had learned by now was not passivity but control. The stillness of someone holding a significant amount of force very deliberately in check. She had seen what happened when he stopped holding it. She had seen it in the ballroom, the first night, the way everyone in the room had shifted when he intervened, the way even Senna's certainty had fractured the moment his hand caught her wrist. "What do you do with this?" she asked. "I contain it," he said. "The document doesn't publish. The journalist is persuaded toward a different story. The source inside is addressed." "Addressed how?" He met her eyes. "Removed from access." She held his gaze. "Will that close the problem?" "For now." He paused. "The longer version of the problem is Senna's family. That arrangement dissolving is not a quiet process. There are people whose interests were structured around it who are not pleased that it's ending." He was quiet. "This is one expression of that displeasure." She absorbed that. "How long does the longer version take?" "Months," he said. "Possibly more." She looked at him. "Does it make sense for me to be in the middle of that?" It was not quite a question and not quite a statement. He heard the complexity in it. "No," he said. And then, after a pause, "But you already are." She leaned back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling briefly. She thought about her mother, who had a saying she used whenever Thuso got herself into something complicated. "You can't unenter a door." Straightforward. Slightly exasperated. Entirely true. She had entered the door. She looked back at him. "Then I stay in the middle of it," she said. "And we handle what needs handling." Something crossed his face. She recognized it by now, the brief, nearly invisible expression that appeared when she said or did something that landed unexpectedly. She had decided she liked it. Not because it meant she was impressing him, but because it meant he was genuinely surprised sometimes, that she was not a quantity he had fully calculated, and she found that she did not want to be a quantity he had fully calculated. "All right," he said. The conversation about what they were to each other happened on a Wednesday evening in his apartment. She had been to his apartment twice before, both times for practical reasons. Once because there had been a security consideration and his building was a controlled environment. Once because she had needed to sign a document related to the investment structure they were building together and his office staff had gone home. Each time, she had registered the apartment the way she registered all environments. Precisely, quickly, filing the data without making too much of it. His apartment was high up in a building in Itaewon. Not as aggressively corporate as she had expected. Books, actual books, lined 2 full walls of the living space. Mostly in Korean, but with a significant section of English titles, she had made herself not catalog in too much detail because she would have lingered too long. A desk in the corner near the window that looked like it was used. A kitchen that looked like it was also used. A small collection of objects on the windowsill that were not decorative in a designed way, but personal in a slightly disorganized way that she found unexpectedly humanizing. On this particular Wednesday, They had been working through a set of revised investor documents for 2 hours and had moved from the table to the sofa in the way of people whose work has naturally wound down and who have not bothered to formally relocate, but have ended up sitting at an angle that has nothing to do with documents. The documents were on the coffee table. Neither of them was looking at them. He was looking at her. She was looking at him. They had been doing this for some time. This particular kind of looking, which was different from the attentive listening she had identified in him from the beginning, different from the calm assessment she had seen in the ballroom, different from any of the modes she had catalogued. This was personal. This was him, without any of the professional framing around it, looking at her. "Thuso," he said. "Yes," she said. "I want to ask you something." "All right." He was quiet for a moment. She appreciated that he did not rush himself. She had learned that he thought before he spoke, and that this was not hesitation but integrity. He did not say things he hadn't meant, and he was making sure he meant what he was about to say. "I want to know if what I think is happening between us," he said slowly, "is actually happening." She looked at him. "I want to know because I don't want to assume," he said. "I don't want to make a move you haven't given me any reason to make. I don't want to complicate something that you need to stay clean." He held her gaze. "But I also don't want to pretend it isn't there." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about the argument for distance. She had made it to herself many times. She had made it well. She knew every component of it and could construct it cleanly in 20 seconds. She also thought about the dinner and the small restaurant and the way he had walked beside her at an exact and careful distance. She thought about the morning with the 4 words. She thought about the ballroom, the very first night, the moment his hand caught Senna's wrist and the room shifted, and the way he had looked at her. Not with any of the things she had expected, but with that quiet ownership that she had spent 3 months trying to find the right word for. She had found the right word. He had chosen her. Before he had any reason to. Before she had given him anything. He had stood in a room full of people who mattered to his world, and he had made himself her wall without asking her permission, and without expecting anything back. She had needed to earn her own safety for so long. She had needed to build her own every door, fight for every room, construct every version of herself that would be taken seriously enough to get what she was trying to get. She had done that. She was still doing it. She would keep doing it, because that was who she was and she did not want to be anything else. But it was different to have someone standing beside that. Not in front of it. Not replacing it. Beside it. She reached out and put her hand over his. She felt him go very still. She turned her hand so that her fingers linked through his. His hand was larger than hers, the skin warm, the knuckles slightly rough, the tattoo ink visible along the back of his hand. "It's happening," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned his hand so that he was holding hers back. Carefully, deliberately, with the specific care of someone who understood that they were holding something that mattered and had no intention of holding it carelessly. "Okay," he said. Outside, Seoul moved in its usual ceaseless way. The light had gone low and warm through the windows. The books were on their walls. The documents were on the coffee table. Neither of them moved for a long time. It was not simple after that. She had not expected it to be. The business structure took 4 more months to finalize. There were complications. 2 investors who pulled back when the full scope of Minho's involvement became clear. 3 others who came in specifically because of it. The infrastructure corridor model was eventually restructured slightly, shaped by the input of people who knew the Korean side of the equation better than she had when she first built it. She did not find the restructuring threatening. She found it clarifying. Choi Byung-kyu remained. He was the anchor of the investment structure. And he was also, she discovered over time, someone who had grown up poor in a country that told him his origins were the ceiling of his ambition, and who had built something anyway, and who had a specific and informed respect for people who did the same. At their 3rd meeting, he said to her, "The way you entered was wrong. What you're building is right. Don't confuse the two." She did not confuse them. The legal complications from Senna's family materialized and were managed. She did not know all the details of how they were managed. Minho kept those in his half of the arrangement, and she kept hers, and they did not need to make the boundary explicit, because they were both people who understood boundaries without requiring them to be spoken aloud. Senna herself, she saw her twice more. Once at a social event where they occupied the same space for an evening without acknowledging each other, each of them doing what they did in such situations, which was to carry on. once in a more charged moment. A hallway outside a meeting room where they were briefly alone, just the two of them, before other people arrived. Senna looked at her. Thuso looked at Senna. "You're still here," Senna said. "Yes," Thuso said. A pause. "He chose you," Senna said. It was not a question. It was not quite an accusation. It was something more honest than either. A statement from someone in pain about a reality they had decided to stop fighting. Thuso was quiet for a moment. "I know it cost you something." Senna's face shifted slightly. She had not expected acknowledgement. She had expected a version of winning, which was different. "It cost everything," Senna said quietly. Thuso held her gaze. "I'm sorry for that. It was not false. She meant it, not the sentimental version, not the performative version, but the real one. She was not the cause of what had been lost between Senna and Minho, but she was standing in the space it had left, and she had enough empathy to know what it cost to be the person watching someone else stand there." Senna looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away. They did not speak again. Minho asked her to stay in Korea permanently at the end of a Tuesday evening in March, 10 months after the ballroom. They were in his apartment. She had a key by then, not because they had had a formal conversation about it, but because he had given it to her quietly on a morning when she had needed to let herself in while he was in a meeting, and neither of them had subsequently suggested returning it. She had thought about that for about 45 seconds and then put it on her keychain. They had finished dinner, one of the evenings where neither of them had planned the evening, but it had simply developed from the end of a work day into food and the sofa and the particular ease of two people who had learned each other's rhythms. He said, "I want you to stay." She looked at him. "Not for the business," he said. "The business gives you reasons to be here as long as you want them. I mean stay. Build here. Make this the place." She was quiet. "You can keep the South Africa base," he said. "I'm not asking you to leave that. I'm asking you to have this also." She thought about her mother, about Soweto, about everything she had built herself toward and through and out of. None of that was things she was walking away from. She was not the type to walk away from things. But she was also, she had understood over these months, not someone who needed to be only one thing in one place. She looked around the apartment. The books, the desk, the windowsill objects, the view of Seoul below. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. He exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. The marriage was quiet. Not small, but not the spectacle that Seoul's social world might have expected or, in some quarters, resented. It was attended by 40 people, in a room chosen for its warmth rather than its impressiveness. Choi Byung-kyu was there. Dumi came from Seoul, slightly overwhelmed by the situation he had been tracking from a distance, and clearly feeling he had some ownership of the outcome. Her mother came from South Africa, wearing a dress that she had bought specifically for the occasion and shoes that she complained about for the entire evening. Minho's mother sat beside her, and the two women, who shared no common language, managed to communicate an entire conversation through facial expressions and the universal vocabulary of mothers examining the people who have chosen their children. He put the ring on her finger with the same deliberateness he brought to everything. Completely present, completely sure, not performing the sureness for anyone in the room, but simply being it. She held his hand after. The tattoo ink under her fingers. The small scar on his lip when he leaned toward her. She thought about a ballroom, about a hand catching a wrist, about a broken necklace on a marble floor. She thought about a pendant in a man's open palm and the specific way he had looked at her. Not with suspicion, not with doubt, but with something that had taken her months to name properly. He had already decided. Before she had given him anything, he had looked at her in that ballroom and seen something that he chose to stand beside. She had spent her whole life building herself into something the world would take seriously. She had not built herself into something worth choosing. He had done that for her, not by doing anything for her, by choosing her as she actually was, the fabricated version and the real version and the Soweto version and the Seoul version and the version that was still becoming. She looked at him. He was looking at her. The room continued around them. Her mother was telling Dumi something animated. Choi Byung-kyu was talking to Minho's oldest business associate. The light was warm. "You're thinking," he said quietly. "I'm always thinking," she said. "What about?" She looked at him. "The ballroom," she said. "The first night." He was quiet for a moment. "What about it?" "You already knew," she said. "When you stepped in." You already knew everything. Yes, he said. Why? She asked. Why choose that moment to step in? Why not let it happen? It would have been cleaner for you. He looked at her for a long moment. Because you were standing there, he said, with your hand on your neck where the chain had been, and you didn't move. You didn't run. You didn't fold. You stood in the middle of all of it, and you didn't give anyone a single thing. He paused. I had been watching you for 2 months. I knew what you were doing and why you were doing it. And in that moment I understood that the person in front of me was more real than anyone else in that room. He held her gaze. I wasn't going to let anyone take that apart. She was quiet. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul did, enormous and relentless and alive. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. We built this. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. We did. 2 years after the ballroom, the infrastructure investment structure they had built together made its first completed deployment. A development corridor linking several key points across sub-Saharan Africa, with a capital structure anchored partly in Korean investment and managed through a company that was, by then, no longer small, no longer inflated, and no longer in need of fabrication. It was real. All of it. She sat in the Johannesburg office of that company on the day the first deployment completed, and thought about the night she had put a false identity in a borrowed dress, and walked into a Korean ballroom with nothing but a vision and the nerve that came from having nothing left to lose. She thought about what the version of herself from that night would make of this room, this desk, this title on the office door. She thought she would understand it, even the parts that had been unexpected. Especially the parts that had been unexpected. Her phone buzzed. A message from Minho. 4 words. The same structure as the first time. As if he knew. How does it feel? She looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed back 2 words. Like ours. She sent it. She put the phone face down on the desk and looked out the window at Johannesburg in the afternoon. And she let the feeling be exactly what it was. That's the story of Thuso and Minho. From a broken necklace on a marble floor to a company built on the kind of foundation you can't fake your way to. The kind that only exists on the other side of real work, real danger, and a choice made by a man who saw who she was before she had finished building it. Now I want to hear from you. Was Thuso right to lie her way into that room? Or did the end justify the means? Did Minho go too far in using his power to protect her? Or was that exactly what needed to happen? And what moment hit you hardest? Was it the ballroom? The dinner? That quiet Wednesday on the sofa? Let me know in the comments. And if this story kept you here until the end, because stories like this take everything to write and give everything back when you share them. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs a story that proves that the real version of you is always enough, even if the world takes a while to catch up. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.